Pleased to have with us Owen Braun, who is the lead program manager on the Scribbler team. Scribbler is a new application in Office, which is not something that happens every day, so we're really excited to hear about it. And I know some researchers here have been in contact in the past with Scribbler, but we're excited to find out what they're up to and where we might be able to help in any way. And without further ado, Owen.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dean. Everybody let me know if you can or can't hear me okay. I tend to wander around a bit as I speak, so I may wander into or out of the range of certain microphones. As mentioned, my name is Owen Braun. I'm the lead program manager for Scribbler. One other name you'll almost certainly hear in context with Scribbler is Chris Prattley, who's my boss. He came up with the whole idea about a year ago, wrote the vision document, etc. So actually, Dean alluded to a couple of things that I wanted to get out of the way right at the beginning. So we're a new application for this version of Office that we're working on right now, which, now that we've decoupled from Longhorn, again, is called Office 11 and not Office.net, which is the name you may have heard it referred to by us in the past. The plan of record right now is that Scribbler is actually going to be a standalone application, but depend on having an Office.net install or license on the box. Now, I have a question, a little bit of a pop quiz for people. Actually, before I ask this question, let me just give a show of hands of how many people have heard of Scribbler in some way before. Okay, so most of you. So question, is Scribbler run only on the tablet PC? Anyone? Theory? Thank you. Indeed, it does not only run on the tablet PC. This is one of those things that I like to clarify right at the beginning, because the name does sort of suggest inking, scribbling. And part of my point here today will be to show you why we think it's valuable even when you're not on a tablet. So what is it really? Well, I'm going to give you a little bit of our spiel here. One of the things we like to say is that Scribbler is like an add-on pack for your brain. It's this thing that makes it very easy to dump your notes onto an electronic form, organize them, share them, and find them again later. One of the things I like to do when I start talking to people about Scribbler is find out a little bit about how they tend to take notes themselves. So actually, I don't see too many people that are doing note-taking right now. But out of curiosity, how many of you, when you take notes, tend to do so with a paper notebook? Can I just see a show of hands? Okay, so maybe like a third to a quarter of people. How many people use a laptop? Okay, not that many, like an eighth maybe. And how many people sort of don't really take notes, or they take notes on the desk or scraps of paper or whatever is convenient? There's the rest of them. Okay. Well, let me actually drill down a little bit more. So people who use laptops, I know there weren't too many of you. How many of you use email as the thing that you write in? Got 2. How many of you use Word? Notepad? Got one? Brave souls admitting they use Notepad. Anybody else? Other things you guys use?
CE.
Outlook Notes? CE, right? PDAs? PowerPoint, really? Fascinating. How many people, anybody in the audience use PowerPoint to take notes? Fascinating. I can totally understand it, actually. The funny thing is, when we started designing Scribbler, we were looking at products that had sort of outlining style features in them. And PowerPoint, not surprisingly, actually has a great outlining interface in it. We just don't tend to think of it as an outlining tool. So it's interesting. It makes sense in a way that I come to research. And in research, there would be some people who are like, aha, that actually works well for outlining as well. So when we talk about Scribbler, I sort of present some questions that sort of go from softballs to hardballs. Pointing at the people who take notes in paper notebooks today, the first question, it's not so much think of me asking you, but someone asking you in the abstract. Somebody that you meet with, say, once a week or once a month, and they just say, okay, at the beginning of the meeting, what did we talk about in our last meeting? Well, this usually isn't so hard to figure out, right? I mean, you remember it some in your head, and you can probably flip back in your notebook to the place where you took those notes. If it was a month ago, it might be a little harder to find, but whatever, you can probably do it. Then there's this other inevitable one that comes up, which is you're in a meeting with somebody or a set of people, and you're the person taking notes, and you look around and nobody else is taking notes, and you get to the end of the meeting, and somebody's like, oh, gosh, this was really valuable. Can you email me your notes? And it's like, well, of course I can, but you just created a task for me, because now I have to go back and transcribe them into email. And then one of the hardest ones that we've discovered when we talk to people who use paper notebooks is, gosh, if something happened like 6 months to a year ago, then you're sort of hosed, right? Because you might remember it, but if you don't remember it, being able to find it in your notebook is very hard. And if you're lucky, it's in the notebook that you have with you. And if you're not, it's in a previous notebook, which, again, if you're lucky, is in your office and not like in a trash can or on a shelf where you can't find it or something. So there's a lot of challenges here, and this is where we start to carve out some of our opportunities. For laptop users, the interesting thing about this one is, first of all, a lot of people have laptops in meetings, a fair amount already. But there's like a lot of email and internet and non-note-taking related stuff that tends to go on. And so that doesn't really count for our purposes. But again, it's an opportunity because these are people who have a computer with them in a situation where they often do have to take notes. So some of the things that they tend to find ad hoc solutions for, but not necessarily have a great tool for, are things like how do you track the action items that came out of a meeting. And incidentally, I tend to focus on sort of meetings and knowledge worker and like professional scenarios a lot here. But a great deal of this translates directly to I'm a student, I'm in a classroom, et cetera. We actually have sort of a great focus on both of those scenarios. Another thing is, if you want to just track all the things that you want to talk to a person about, again, people tend to invent sort of little systems for this. Out of curiosity, how many people who write in paper notebooks draw triangles or write stars or circle, or can I just see a show of hands? What do you guys use them for? Anybody? Just what does it mean to you? Action items? What else? Is that it? People draw checkboxes? Anyone? Bullets? Arrows. It's interesting. If you go over to our hallway, over in Building 17, we did this survey, which I'll tell you a little bit more about, back last summer, where we just asked about 1,200 people about their note-taking habits. Actually, we contracted an outside company to do it. And one of the things that was cool about this is that they got about 300 people to mail in their actual notes, just notes from the refrigerator, notes from their notebooks, notes that were attached to their computer, whatever. And so we took this and we literally plastered them over our entire hallway. So when you walk down, you just have this notes on all sides of you. The great thing about this is that when we have questions like this, such as, gosh, what do people write in their notes, to mark notes as special, we can just go down the hall and be like, okay, triangle, star, checkbox, bullet, whatever. And it's interesting because, when I talk to people, there's typically a great variety of these things. Now, I'm just going to throw an idea out there that we'll come back to later. One of the things that's interesting about that is that most people don't tend to develop like really complicated systems of symbols. In fact, it's immensely simple, and it usually just is, this is more important than other notes, so that you can scan down the list and say, oh, those are the things that I, wanted to follow up on or needed to come back to or whatever. So for laptop users, so I'm going to take a second here and sort of throw a fish out to the tablet PC world. Where you tend to get completely hosed is when you're sitting there typing away in a meeting, and then somebody goes up to the whiteboard. I have whiteboards here, but I didn't really set myself up. I should have drawn something. And then I can point to it and say, you're using a laptop. If you're taking notes, how did you capture that? And the answer is we're sort of used to not capturing those things. That's not possible, or you have to use a piece of paper, which you're going to lose or isn't associated with your electronic notes, so you don't bother. So again, opportunity. Now for scrap paper users, it's an interesting question because a lot of people who don't really have paper notebooks or laptops may be part of this segment that don't really need a better note-taking solution. And so if you don't need one, the sell for Scribbler is tougher because we're not sort of selling you on Scribbler so much as just selling you on the idea or the habit of taking notes at all. But I still think there's some opportunity for these people as well. That survey that I mentioned, I just wanted to give you some quick data about it. So 91% of the 1,200 people who participated in this take notes in some form or another. My biggest amazement is that there are 9% of the people in this group who managed to get along without taking any notes whatsoever. Amongst the 90% who take notes, 70% of them use some kind of paper, which might be a legal pad or a 3-ring binder or a multi-subject notebook or whatever. This actually includes scraps of paper. And 30% of them use laptops. It's just an accident that these add up to 100%. This is an overlapping group. Dean?
What kind of sample is this? Who are these?
I actually don't know too much about where they came from, but I can tell you that the professionals, people labeled as professionals, were typically workers in like small, medium, large organizations. They were doctors, lawyers, people like us, knowledge workers, secretarial in some cases. And then on the student side, it was college and above, I believe, college and graduate students. Beyond that, I actually don't know too much because most of what we were paying this company for was go be sort of statistically correct, and so don't know much more of the details.
What percentage of laptop owners use paper to take the notes?
The interesting thing is, it's a great question. What percentage of laptop owners used paper to take notes? Unfortunately, the problem with the data that we get back is that it's sort of pre-analyzed a bit, and that's actually one of the kinds of questions that's hard for us to ask where we say, we have two stats, how much do they overlap? And we didn't specifically ask a question that got at that. But I can tell you that if you break this down into individual sort of professional and student groups, there you can actually, I think, see the overlap a little bit more, because it's something like, the numbers add up to more than 100%. It's something like 80% of professionals use, paper, like legal pads was by far the most common one, and 33% or something use laptops. And so you know that at base minimum, there's some set of, like 8% or something of people. Now, my intuition and my experience since sort of starting to work on this project at Microsoft is that there's a huge overlap, because I actually think that most people who use laptops at some time or another also find themselves in situations where they don't have their laptop, and so they resort to paper or whatever is nearby. The thing we haven't seen too much of yet is people who sort of have a consistent usage of both something like a paper notebook that's sort of organized and a laptop as well. Some other interesting stats. So 26% of the professionals often summarize handwritten notes in email. This is a definite place where we can go in and make their lives a little bit better. 23% of professionals often can't find stuff they're looking for in their notes. I actually suspect that this happens even more often than that for people who do take notes. But it's one of those things where often you don't really expect to find something. You're just like, oh, forget it. That's from 6 months ago or from 12 months ago, and so I'm not even going to bother. And that's, again, actually a hidden opportunity. Now, the coolest stat that came out of this was sort of the where is our market question. So we just asked people directly, do you want to find a better note-taking system than pen and paper? And the cool thing about this is 36% of people said this. And that's only a third of people, you're thinking, right? But they don't even know about Scribbler yet. They don't know about anything related to there being a tool that makes this better. Imagine 20 years ago if somebody had said, do you need a spreadsheet? Do you need a word processor? Maybe you have to go back 30 years for that. But at any rate, the point is that a lot of this is a starting point where once you demonstrate that there's actually value there, this number can actually go way up. I'm actually going to skip over this slide. This is just a little bit about how we bucket our customers. And then come to scenarios. So I'm actually going to walk through these in a little bit of detail and talk about the features that we have for each. But before I do that, I want to sort of get us a little bit grounded in Scribbler. So let's fire it up. So this is Scribbler. What I'm going to do is sort of walk you through a little bit of the basic UI, how it's shaped, what it looks like, what it does. And then we'll sort of come back and talk about some of the specific scenarios. So the first thing you may notice is you've got, a piece of paper sort of thing to work on. A lot of what goes on in here is sort of all the good stuff that you'd expect from Word. You can type out lists. You can use tab to indent things, and they turn into real indents, not tabs. You can bullet and number things and customize those, etc. I'm not going to show you too much of that stuff because, it's pretty much what you would expect from using Word already. The next thing you may notice is that there's a little area at the top where I have a sort of title for the page. I'm just going to point that out for now. We'll talk about it a little bit more in a second. And the next thing above that is this set of tabs that are across the top there. One of the things that we wanted to do with Scribbler is to make it feel kind of like a paper notebook feels, where you have little pages that you can jot random pieces of information down on, and you don't really have to think, oh, am I going to save that, or where am I going to save that, or should this be a file, or should I put it in this other file that I already have? So what we did is we concentrated on like a visual metaphor that sort of made sense. So when I start Scribbler for the very first time, I won't have this content that I have here, but what I will have is that big tab with a 1 there, and none of the other tabs, and just a blank page to write on. And if I start typing and I fill that page up and decide I want another one, all I have to do is click on the New Page button, and I get a new page. Another tab is added to the control above. And I don't have to think about saving or any of these other things because all of it happens automatically. And this is a part of the demo that doesn't always work, so it's risky to start with, but what the heck. If I type some notes into here, and then I close the application, and then I just go ahead and restart, you'll see that it actually starts me up in the exact same place where I was before, and it saved all the stuff automatically. So the cool thing is, for people who work with paper notebooks, one thing we find is common is that you open the notebook and you have it open to a page, and you often don't even close it, really. You just take it with you, open to the place where you need it, and Scribbler is designed to mimic that same ease of use. Now, some other things that are cool about this control at the top here with the tabs, we call it the riffle control. And the reason why is because one of the most sort of fruitful searching methods that people use with paper notebooks is this extremely low-tech thing where you kind of go like this, and you just flip through it, you riffle through it with your thumbs. And we really wanted to enable some kind of electronic equivalent of that. So we stick the tabs up there, and one thing that's very easy to do is to click on it and just sort of drag through, and it'll flip through all the pages there. Now, you could say, yeah, I can do this in Word, whatever. I have pages in Word already. I could hold down page down. I could hold down this scroll bar. But really the key here is that we've made pages a very sort of first-class, comfortable concept that feel like the pages that are very discrete in a notebook. In Word and in most of the other Office apps, you have this long flowing thread of text that sort of happens to break into pages. So here it's much more at the top-level concept. The other thing that's great is that in addition to the riffling, you can do all the other kinds of navigation you would expect. You can leap directly to pages by clicking on various tabs here. You'll see, you'll see that there's actually a tooltip showing up when I hover over page tabs, which just tells me what the number of the page is, the title, the date it was created, so I can actually navigate around a little bit like that. And then there's some downstream things that sort of flow naturally from this design, such as the ability to reorder pages just by clicking on the page tab and dragging it somewhere else. So a lot of very, very simple things accrue from this that are easy to understand and actually even better than what you can do with a paper notebook. In addition to saving things automatically, one other thing that we do automatically is sort of manage the size of the page that you have. So when I create a new page, you'll see that actually right now I don't have any scroll bars on the screen. Well, this one is a bug actually, but I don't have any scroll bars on the main page area. Now this page will get as big as I need it to get. So if I click and then I start typing, let's just say I fill this up with lots of content, scroll bars will show up as I need them. Actually, the one on the bottom, again, ignore. But the one on the right is sort of there to say, OK, you've got more content that will fit on the screen right now. But the cool thing about it is those don't show up until you need them. And if I were to remove content, they go away again, give you this strong feedback that like the page is as big as the stuff on it. And the reason we did this is because most traditional Office applications are very focused on eventual output. And most of them bias still towards paper output because most people actually still print things out on paper. So one of the first decisions that you tend to make, usually implicitly, in an application like Word or PowerPoint or Excel is like, what size of paper am I working on? And in Scribbler, we sort of said, look, what we're trying to do is make note-taking a really first-class electronic activity. So don't worry about what paper you're printing on. And one of the things that we did to sort of ease that when you go to print is actually this feature called Best Fit Printing, where whatever size of stuff you have on the screen here, we'll try to sort of scale it down a little bit and then adjust the margins and change the font sizes if necessary, all very low impact things, no more than like 10 to 20% variation, in the interest of getting it to fit onto a single page. So you don't really have to think about it very much. Usually, most of the time, it just does the right thing. Oh. PowerPoint. Oh, go Scribbler. Good Lord. This is actually a random build of Office.net, so I suppose I may be expecting too much from PowerPoint to just work, but nevertheless, go Scribbler. Where was I? All right. Question in the back.
Yes. It may be off subject, but I noticed you have a little tab called passwords.
Mm-hmm.
So storing 100 passwords on a laptop may not be a smart idea. You take a look at Terence Peace's idea of remembering one hard password and generating passwords of various outsiders out of it.
Indeed. Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, this is one of those scenarios that we tend to throw in there because we're trying to appeal to sort of the human sense of like, I have a lot of passwords and accounts and gosh, this probably isn't the safest thing to do, but I have a piece of paper that I write them all down on, or like an email, and so it's one of those things that I'm always cautious about talking about because we don't have any collateral around this from a feature standpoint. There's no privacy with there's no password for Scribbler to get into pages like that. I actually do think that in V2 and beyond, that's an area we're going to want to do more with, because one of the scenarios that we didn't really do much specifically for in V1, but liked the idea was making an electronic diary an easy extension of this. And from a feature standpoint, turning something from a notebook into a diary is mostly making it easier to form an emotional connection to it, which is a little hard to do with hardware in general, but we're getting into an age now where an awful lot of people use laptops all the time, and that's not as much of the barrier. So things like securing it so that I can't accidentally click into it whilst in a presentation like this, important, and making it more personalizable as part of that as well. Did I see another question before I go on? Okay. One other thing that you'll notice happened here when I started typing a whole bunch of stuff is that it actually scrolled up underneath this title area that I mentioned before. Well, the title area's main point is to give you a title that you can type on your notes. So for this, I might type something like Scribbler presentation or Scribbler demo. But the other thing you can do here is actually click into it and add other stuff that you just want to keep in front of you whilst the main body of your notes flows by. So for example, if I want to keep track of follow-up questions, I can click down here, type follow-up questions, and then say, how much will it cost? Where can I install? Etc. And I have to do a little bit of adjustment here because this isn't all quite hooked up right yet. But the idea is that this stuff stays in front of my face regardless of what else I do on the page. And actually, surprising... Oh, hold on. There might yet be hope. Oh, there's no hope. Oh, well. At any rate, this is something that we actually find people often do, even with paper. It's one of these things that I didn't anticipate because I don't do this myself, but a lot of people will actually take a Post-it or something and stick it on the top of a page of notes or have a page that they sort of dog-ear the corner of and flip back to a lot inside their notebook. And this is just a way to do that much more naturally and easily. Let's see if I can get Scribbler back here. I'm in this PowerPoint land where I don't know how to get back to the... There we go. Now, a couple of other things that I wanted to show you. So at the bottom of the screen here, we have... Yeah, sadly, I lost the page. Crashing, we're still doing that a little bit yet. At the bottom of the page here, I have another set of tabs, and these are actually like the notebooks that I have. So I have one for personal stuff, which is sort of all these things that you saw. They're like CDs I want to buy and movies I want to see and passwords, etc. I have another one for quick notes. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then I have a folder here, which is pretty much what you would expect. It's a folder. When I click inside of it, I actually get a different set of notebooks on the bottom. And again, sort of focused more on a student-like scenario here, I might have a tab for each of the classes that I'm in. And each time I click on one of these different tabs at the bottom, I just get a different set of page tabs at the top. So if I click over to chemistry, I've got a different set of pages. And as I scroll through these, you can see I've got notes in the title area, notes in the regular page. One thing I haven't shown too much yet, but I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. This is a tablet PC that I'm using right now. It is possible to create ink. And anywhere you can type in Scribbler, you can create ink just as easily. So this is an example. If I have a whole lecture where we're studying whatever this molecule is, which I completely fabricated, then you can draw it up there and sort of type your notes and always have it in front of you. The last thing that I wanted to point out about the main user interface here is this find box that's up at the upper right. We put find in a very prominent position in Scribbler because this is really one of the core ways that we make life better, both for people who use paper notebooks today and for people who are using laptops that are sort of ad hocing their way through like email or Word or PowerPoint or one of these other solutions. So I actually, unfortunately, Find is not hooked up yet, so I can't show it to you, but I can tell you a little bit about the design of the user interface. You go up here, you type in a keyword. We do the sort of traditional thing you would expect, which is leap you to the next place in your notes where that word occurs. But the cool thing is we actually sort of look across all of your notes and do the search against all your set of notebooks down here. So if I was searching for the word there, I might leap here and it would be selected. All of the occurrences of there would actually be highlighted on this page. All of the places where there occurs in this notebook would be highlighted on the section tabs there. And if I tell Scribbler to search across all of my notes, it'll actually highlight tabs down here as well. So it gives you an immediate sort of overview of like where all the occurrences of that thing are. The other thing that's kind of nice about it is that once I've done that, it's actually very easy for me to then bring up a pane on the side that shows me all of the results in a list, just as though I had run a search sort of on an internet search engine. And the reason we did this is because we noticed that there are sort of two very successful browsing, finding, searching strategies in existing software today. One is the extremely stupid find that we have in Word, which is what we sort of simulated at the beginning. And the other is the sort of Google / Yahoo style search where you type in a thing and then get a list of results. And we wanted to make it really easy to move back and forth between these two things. So I have more to say, but I suspect that some of them will be questions that you ask. So go for it.
Have you looked at agraphs, things like having a search be tolerant to typos? Because when people type notes for themselves, they probably spell even worse than when they type notes for others.
Absolutely, yeah. I think your question was basically, are we more tolerant of spelling errors and
the search?
These are people's notes. We actually, we had lofty goals here, and we will achieve them for certain, but maybe not entirely in V1. What we wanted to do, more specifically in looking at this whole search versus find question, is not just a UI thing, but also an engine question. Because the other thing that search engines tend to do on the internet is be very good at sort of extracting the root of your word, of stemming it, of matching against other forms of the word. In a lot of international cases, there are certain diacritical marks or character equivalences that they do for you as well. And instead of Word, when you type it, find and then a word, it's doing, for the most part, sort of an exact match against all that stuff. So what we really wanted to do was get the very fuzzy find features. For V1, we're actually not going to get most of that stuff. These are, unfortunately, sad late-breaking cuts for us. But in the future, this is very much part of our vision, that the way we think about it is like this. The internet is a huge mass of content, most of which you know nothing about. So when you run a search, obviously the search engine has got to do like 90% of the work for you, and it's hopeless to try and just browse through all the things. So you need things like Google and ranking engines and relevancy feedback and all this other stuff so that you can kind of be, hopefully find the right thing early on. You also need all the fuzzy matching stuff because God knows, you're sort of grasping at straws to type in a keyword in the first place. Now, Word, on the other hand, is very deterministic and doesn't have to have a lot of apparatus behind it, but gives you very simple results. So what we sort of said is, your notes for things that you're working on right now, or for things that you worked on in the recent past, are kind of like a Word document in the sense that you probably actually can accurately remember more or less the exact keyword that you're looking for. So you can type that in, we'll leap you there, and then you can start browsing through things just by clicking Next and Previous. But the other problem is that when Notes starts to age, like when they're not things from last week or from last month, but when they're from 6 months ago or 12 months ago or 2 years ago, mining that data is actually fairly similar to mining internet data. Like the fact that you wrote it doesn't really matter that much if it's that old. And so at that point, we needed the more robust sort of show me all the results in a list, allow me to sort them by different criteria, such as the title of them or the contents or the date when they were written or the section or notebook that they're in. And do all that fuzzy or matching stuff. So we're going to be weaker on the fuzzy matching stuff in V1, but long term it's very much part of our plan. Yes?
You mentioned earlier the case where somebody who actually takes notes on their laptop forgets their laptop and has to take paper notes. How do you deal with that with Scribbler? Can I somehow import those paper notes into Scribbler later?
That is an interesting question. The question is, if I forget my laptop and I write notes on paper, can I import them into Scribbler later? Gosh, to be totally honest, we haven't thought about that scenario in particular very much. I can say a couple of things. So, on some level, if you don't have a device with you, you're sort of hosed for the capture part for the following reason. On the inking side, like when you're writing, in fact, actually, I'll just show you some of this. If we want to actually capture the ink that you're writing, especially for handwriting relatively accurately, we actually have to give you a little bit of assistive UI while you're writing. So if I go start writing, oh boy. Oh, actually, you know what? I'm sorry. That was my fault. I have to run a separate build here to do inking stuff. One moment. Incidentally, has everybody in the audience seen one of these Acer convertibles like the one I'm using now? Like, can I see a show of hands of people who have seen
What?
one of these things? It's an Acer convertible tablet. All right, let me give you the quick show and tell here. I'm not going to be able to do this with everything attached. You know what? We're just going to lose the video for a second. It's okay. We'll all survive. The thing I wanted to show you is this is a prototype. Actually, this is a sort of beta unit back from Acer of one of the tablet, what I said is convertible. And the reason it's called a convertible is because it mostly looks like a regular laptop. And we kind of expect this is what most tablets will look like. However, the things that this has that a regular laptop does not have, first of all, it's got a little pen stuck here. And I can actually use the pen just like a mouse. I can hover over the screen in order to move the mouse cursor around. I can double-click on things to open them, etc. But the other key thing here is that I can actually twist the screen around like this and fold it down. Now, I don't actually have the tablet set up to do this easily, so I can't show it to you, but there's a button you can press when it's set up correctly that just switches the orientation at this point to be portrait mode. And then you can continue to write with a pen or read or whatever. And this is, in fact, one of the cool scenarios here is that it's very comfortable to sit down with this and actually read with it more like a book. This is one of the things where laptops and desktops tend to fall down today. So I just wanted to give you a little quick show and tell of what the machine basically looks like before we continue. Yeah, question?
Since you already had 2 crashes of Scribbler,
Yes.
how fanatical are you about logging every single keystroke and every single mouse click just for the next crash?
You mean in order to preserve the data?
In order not to lose Word, because my
Right.
never does that.
Sure. Actually, so the question was, how intense are we about saving your data? I would say the answer is fairly intense in the sense that our autosave interval, we actually are doing sort of a traditional autosave behind the scenes, The interval we have it set to is right now is 30 seconds, and that's, you might lose 30 seconds of data, but the thing is, so far we actually have had no performance problems, so it might even be possible to crank it up. We have to sort of wait until we get further along with the app to see. Point is, like, if you're losing 30 seconds of work, in most cases, you're going to be fine, I think.
What's short-term memory?
I'm sorry?
How long is short-term memory?
Oh, right. Well, 7 items, however long that is. All right, let me plug myself back in here.
Good question. Are you going to, while you're doing that, are you going to allow for things like mind mapping and just other ways of taking notes, or are you pretty much? I know you allow for diagrams. And I guess that's related.
Great question. Do we allow for mind mapping and stuff like that? Well, hey, what? Let me get to that in just a second.
I've got a whole book of it here. I'll show you later.
Let me just show you a little bit about the inking experience. So, when I write in Scribbler, I start laying down ink. And after I've written enough ink, Scribbler sort of makes a little bit of a decision about what it thinks I'm doing. And it just shows up this very, oh god, it's actually so light I don't think you guys can see it at all. No, it's in fact invisible to you guys. But there's, on the screen here, I don't know if you guys will be able to see it, there's this lightly shaded box that's around what I've typed. And the lightly shaded box's purpose is simply to give you a little bit of acknowledgement of what Scribbler thinks you're doing. So the most basic decision that we have to make is, are you doing handwriting, or are you drawing something? And this actually is a great open research area that I'll mention again later. But the reason we have to know that is because we treat the two kind of differently. If I draw a picture, then I'll actually get a different kind of canvas from this one. And it has some different behaviors built into it. It looks different, first of all. Can you guys see that one? Yeah, I guess you can. But it also has some different behaviors built into it. So if I grow the canvas in various directions, it will just continue increasing the size. If I draw another picture to the side of it, and then I connect the two of them, it will actually... Oh, that didn't work. Normally what it'll do is join the canvases together. Whereas when I'm doing handwriting, like I did up above, it actually captures it the same way that it would capture a line that I had typed, meaning that I can indent it, I can grab it and move it, I can drag it, I can convert it to text, etc., which is not something I could do with a picture. So we have to do a little bit of that analysis up front. Now, the mind mapping question is a great leading question, which I have to boot into this other version of Scribbler in order to show. We did... let's try this again. One of the things that we wanted to do with Scribbler was break down this sort of 1D linear flow that we're so used to inside of Word. And so we made the page a very comfortable 2D surface to work on. And what I mean by that is... that was one of them. They're like quantum pairs. They can't both be running at the same time. Okay. So if I'm in Scribbler, one thing I haven't really showed too much yet, I've sort of showed us creating new pages and typing on them. And in this scenario, I create a new page, and I have a blinking insertion point somewhere, and I just start typing. And so far, it pretty much looks like Word. Well, the key thing here is that I can type some stuff here. I could create a little list. Let's just pretend for a moment that this is a list of like features that we're trying to debate in an ads cuts meeting for Scribbler v1. We're trying to decide if we're going to have these in v1 or v2. And over here, I can just click and type another list. There's no barrier to this whatsoever. I can type anywhere on the page. And inside of each of these, I'm not really demonstrating it very much, but I can create all the sort of multi-level outline goodness, that you would sort of associate with Word or PowerPoint. And the cool part about it is it's really easy for me to actually grab things, drag them out of one of these objects and into another one. So I can actually lay out a list of things on one side of the page and then just sort of sort them into piles visually. This is something that we want to do a great deal more of in the future. But for V1, we sort of just got the basic illustration of the concept. So I'm actually not sure if this is like classical mind mapping, but it's like the similar sort of dump and then draw connections. And
classical mind mapping, you start with a center point and then draw your key points around and maybe add symbols and colors and that kind of thing to get the flow of thought. Some of it's used for note taking, and others used for note making. Note making is after the fact, where you're trying to organize
synthesis.
Yeah. Right.
So. Yep. Yeah, exactly. And in fact, this is one of those features that we sort of thought about this scenario at the beginning. We talked to some people who told us about mind mapping and about traditional outlining styles. And we weren't really sure if we were going to get very much of it in version 1. And then our developers went off and did this sort of cheeky thing, which we hadn't asked for on the design team, which was to make this live drag drop that I'm showing you right now work so nicely, where you can see it drag out, see it drag back in. And as a result, we're like, gosh, this is actually really great. This is sort of what I want to be able to do on my whiteboard after I write ideas down onto it. I think there was another question.
I'm sure you can send a page. Can you send a folder?
In email?
Yeah.
That's a good question. We don't have any apparatus for that in this version, but we sort of started out with the whole scenario of I basically need to send you my project notes or I need to hand off to you. And it's sort of gotten boiled down a little bit for V1. I kind of expect that's something we'll get back. Like we had an ability to say, zip everything up and then send. What we do have, again, sort of a good segue in V1, is if you're in a meeting, for example, and you've just typed up all your notes, this is not a very characteristic looking page, but it's just like it is in the other Office applications. It's really easy to drop down the email envelope, send the notes off, they get mailed, they stay here in your notebook. And it's a great thing to point out. This is the same way the envelope works elsewhere, but in this scenario, it's particularly cool because it's as though you just took your notebook, your page of notes out of your notebook, and you mimeograph it, and then you mail it out to everybody that you need, and it stays put where you created it in the first place.
Can I get stuff out of Scribbler into Word?
You can. What we did in terms of integration with the other Office applications, and particularly Word, was to focus mostly on clipboard interop, because we started out with some ideas about using Scribbler to start generating a document, like in the very rough stages, and you sort of collect information and rough it out, get it into an outline state, and then say run over to Word. Now, we actually still have a scenario, like a research-style scenario, and by there I mean like, collect information preparatory to writing a document, that we still believe is real, but our sense of how common it is has been scoped back a fair amount, because what we discovered when we went and started talking to people and watching our own behavior was, if you're going to write a Word document at the end of some process of research, you tend to start in Word. Not always, but in many cases, you just go to Word and you start playing with stuff, or you go to PowerPoint if it's going to be a presentation, or you go to email if it's going to be an email message. Now, the cases where you don't do that are when you're so far from having the thing written that you don't even know where to start yet. Your boss comes to you and says, I need to know about, like XML in Word in the next version of Office. And you're like, I don't know anything about that. So your first reaction is, I need to find a person or a web page or a document or something that I can read and start to get grounded. And then you sort of see where this happens. You start to read, and then you're like, oh, and you start to make associations, and you want to record some simple things, and maybe copy and paste some snippets of the documents you're working with. And at this point, you are actually looking for sort of a notebook. You're not ready to start writing the document yet, but you know that you're collecting information that may be useful for it. So in that case, we do think interop is very interesting. I'm going to have to leap into another scenario in a second to talk about this more. But again, the main way that we ended up focusing on that was say, this whole button of send it to Word and what have you, there's just a discoverability problem. Most people don't end up discovering features like that because it's a leap of the imagination that there would be such a piece of functionality in the app, as opposed to the thing that everybody knows how to do, which is I go into Scribbler, I've got all my stuff set up the way I want it, copy all that, go to Word, hit paste. And incidentally, on that topic, I can actually select entire pages or entire groups of pages. So it's very easy for me to say, well, apparently not in this build, but it's very easy to click on sort of multiple tabs at the top there, select all of them, and then I can say copy and then paste them into Word, and we'll simply serialize them for you. Other questions?
With your free, you've got some pages in there which have tabular data, like a list of CDs.
Yes.
Makes it look a little bit like a database. Is this really does it have any database-like characteristics, or is it just text?
Great question. Do we have any database-like characteristics, or are we mostly just text? Well, when we started out, we thought we were going to be very databasey. And
all things to all people.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. And as we sort of pared down and started to write the real code and think about the scenarios in more detail, we backed off from that a bit. But I will tell you that one of the ideas about Scribbler that I love long-term is that it's like this soup that you dump stuff into, which is very context-rich. So we actually don't do many of these things in V1, but for example, a lot of times when I'm taking notes, I'm like in a room with a wireless connection, and we can figure out where the room is. We can figure out what meeting is on your calendar. We know potentially what other people are in the room with you, and these are all associative cues, things that we can add to those notes sort of as metadata. So in V1, we don't have most of these abilities, but in subsequent versions, you'll be able to do things like search for notes by other people that were in the room when you were taking them for meetings that we took off of your calendar, or search for notes that I have sent to someone else, or search for notes by all the associative clues that we use when somebody says, I need to find that, and you think to yourself, I don't remember what I wrote, but it was in building 19, and there was this other guy there, so you can use that kind of information to find the stuff again.
That's sort of an example about databases about notes, but you could also imagine having databases notes such as, for example, what are the CD albums that we've discussed in this class?
Right.
Being able to then have a list of CD albums that we haven't discussed.
Yep. So there's some new stuff going on with sort of what I call lightweight database, like lists, in this next version of Excel. That's sort of designed to take databases from being sort of relatively monolithic things that only small sets of people use to being more things like this, and calling them lists like what people think of when they sit down and write out. It's funny, people create databases all the time. Just that nobody would call them that because you don't have the complexity typically of requirements and of structure that most databases do. So in V1 of Scribbler, we actually did not get the list integration there that we were hoping for, but it's totally something we're going to do in the future. So that you can basically create things in Scribbler which are sort of real lists. Most likely, you won't have to do anything special to create them. If you type some stuff, tab, type some stuff, enter, and then continue, we can just interpret that as a list. And if you paste it into Excel or somewhere else, you could do that. We'll probably have some of the minimal capabilities within Scribbler to sort, create a little bit of views on them, just so that you can, you could be able to take this, categorize, and then group by genre, by artist, or something else. So definite future stuff for us.
Do you have any market test data on how these different features play and how they play with different audiences?
Question is, do we have any market data about how these features play in general and with different audiences? The short answer is no, because what you're seeing is sort of very bleeding edge code that did not exist sort of 2 months ago. So we haven't had a chance to sort of put the app in front of people and rather than asking them in the abstract what they might like or how they take notes today, say, what are your reactions to this? Now, in that field trial, in the survey that I mentioned earlier, I'm giving you the barest skim of the information that we collected there. It was actually a quite large questionnaire, something like 200 questions, that asked about everything from note-taking behaviors, like how do you tend to write your notes in tables like this? Do you tend to use bullets and numbers? Do you tend to write all over the page and draw connections between things? To what mechanisms do you use? Do you use a laptop? Do you use paper notebooks? Do you use legal pads? Do you use scraps of paper? To how often do you take notes? To what situations are you in when you take notes? Classes, meetings, etc. To what is your social attitude towards somebody else having a laptop in a room with you, for example? So there's a very broad sort of data collection exercise for us about where the possible opportunities were. Now, the other part of it, which I think is more what you're asking about, is now that we have some ideas here about how you could use a tool to take notes, how do we validate that? And that's actually something that's tremendously on our mind since we're a brand new application in a brand new category. So we have a field trial that we're going to be running starting when Beta 1 of Office ships, which is near the end of the summer. Where what we're going to do is we have 18 people from 3 different sort of areas. One set is like sort of professional, like legal and people like that. Another set are students, and another set are knowledge workers, people like like us at Microsoft. And we're going to give them all Acer convertibles like this, loaded up with Scribbler, and give them sort of a questionnaire at the beginning that asks them lots of questions about their note-taking habits. We're going to meet with them weekly to sort of see how their usage of Scribbler is going, try to glean information about what their challenges are in using the application, have sort of a wrap-up at the end where we sort of ask them some of the same questions we asked at the beginning and also new ones based on their knowledge of the application. And so that one is going to be a big sort of in-depth, hopefully, validation of a lot of our ideas.
But won't that be too late to affect the feature cut decisions that you're making?
Happily, we haven't had time to get to the luxury items yet. So most of the things that we have kept are things that in almost any world we're pretty sure would be useful. So I hope that resonates a bit for you guys. Like when I show you most of these features, they're sort of they're very simple, surprisingly. Like, there's just the ability to have notebooks, the ability to have pages, the ability to write anywhere, the ability to keep some notes in front of you while others go away. All of this was sort of what we interpreted as, it's very likely that in any scenario we would want this. Now, we do actually have some time planned out after Beta 1 of Office when we are going to take an extremely tactical amount of time, like a week, and do some additional major feature adjustments based on the feedback that we get from the trial. We don't know what those things are yet. This is truly time reserved for what we anticipate will be, things coming out of left field when we put it into people's hands. So I'd love to have like 8 times as much time as that, but, we're business, so. Yeah.
Will you discuss some of the longer-term ideas that won't make it into V1?
Sure, absolutely. Actually, let me, if I may, just sort of hold on for a second and jump back into the mainstream of the slides, because we've covered some great stuff, but there's some things I want to make sure that I hit, and then we can jump back to questions. Okay, I've talked about actually a lot of the, we've sort of hit a lot of the scenario things that I wanted to talk about, but a couple that I haven't mentioned yet. One very basic one is that down in the quick launch area down here, and I can't really demo this precisely yet, but I can give you a sense of the idea. We're going to install an icon down there that we call Scribbler. And additionally, we set up a sort of global keyboard shortcut using like the Windows key, like Windows key N or something. And both of these are entry points that you can get to no matter what circumstances you're in. And what they will do is, if you will imagine with me for a moment, bring up a small version of Scribbler, which is about, this is from a different scenario illustration. It's about the size of a Post-it note, essentially. And it will actually stick you automatically into a section that we create for you, a notebook, that we create for you by default called Quick Notes, which actually you probably saw before, and give you a new page to write on. So I have to simulate all of this right now because it's not hooked up yet. But the idea is that in this Quick Notes section, I have a series of the same kinds of pages with the same tab-based UI, but they are very small and optimized for individual little pieces of notes like this. And in fact, I tried to make these incredibly realistic. So these are actually taken from real Post-its that I have in my office, which is why they seem incredibly context-free, because Post-its tend to be that way. So the idea here was to provide an electronic solution where it's like, you're talking on the phone to somebody and they start to say, well, oh gosh, you should call Bob, his number is blah, and your hands, independent of the rest of your body, start questing around for pen or opening drawers and looking for stuff. And this is the opportunity to, with a little bit of time, develop the habit, which is just, bang in, and then I'm done. And there's a thing there, I can type into it. And the great part about it is it goes right back into Scribbler alongside all my other notes. And if I don't need this thing ever again, I can ignore it or I can get rid of it, but it's there if I need it. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is a simple feature that we think will be really useful in meetings. I love this. I think somebody should keep count, but I'm pretty sure that PowerPoint is crashing even more than we are. So when I'm in a meeting, one of the things that I often do, as we were talking about earlier, is mark little things for follow-up. So the strategy that we took for this in Scribbler was we're not going to try to force you to adopt a system that we've sort of described for you. We're going to instead basically let you continue to write stuff the way that you would always write it, and just allow you to simply mark stuff that you want to come back to. So if I'm typing in a meeting and I get to something that's important, I say, make sure to talk to Bob. I can just click on this button up here, which has an 8-ball right now because the icon is not available, but imagine, if you will, a little checkbox that would be in there. And when I click on this, what it does is just add a little checkbox next to the item that I'm on right now. Now, actually, this checkbox is pretty much what you would expect. It's something that I can look at. I can see that it makes this note stand out a little bit. I can actually click on it to indicate that this thing is done or doesn't need my attention anymore, or whatever that means. But that's really just sort of the beginning of the feature, because we have a variety of these things that we ship out of the box, and there's a set of actually 8 of them that we define for you by default. Again, the icons aren't hooked up, so they don't look like much of anything yet. But some of these actually don't apply boxes. They'll just apply like formatting, for example, like a highlight or a combination of a highlight and bold or something else. And in fact, when we ship, there will really only be about 3 of these defined that have names that most people seem to respond to, which are like to do, important takeaway, and something else. Like things where we sort of tested this a little bit in usability, and people tend to react. They're like, okay, I understand those. But we had 8 when we went into usability, and people were like, too many, brain exploding. So what we're going to do is leave the rest of them undefined, because the cool thing is you can actually customize them however you want to. You can say, I like my action items to be pink text against a green background and have a little box next to them. Or I have stuff that the teacher said is going to be on the quiz, and so I'm going to mark that with a yellow highlight, and that's all I need. So the cool thing is it provides you this very simple way to differentiate this stuff. Now, this is only the beginning, because the really cool part about this is that when I get to the end of a meeting, for example, it's extremely easy for me to roll these things up. I can bring up this pane where it actually just sorts all the things on the page that are in each category and shows you here's a category of stuff, and here's the things that you've marked underneath it. Now, on this page, it doesn't really show you too much because I haven't done very interesting. But if you give me a second to prevent a bug from occurring, I have to click on all these pages once. And then I can go over here and say in this, and it happened anyway. Let me try again. The cool thing is that you can actually roll these up across an entire notebook or across all of your notebooks. And that allows you to have a good view on what things you've marked for follow-up or as being special at any place in your notes. So if I click through and then I bring up the pane. There we go. Now this is showing me actually things rolled up not just from this page, but from other pages in this notebook. And as I mentioned, you can do this across all of your notes. The great thing about that is that if you actually want to use this as an organizational tool, you can define categories of things that you don't need to follow up on, but that you'd sort of like marked especially for reference, such as the stuff that's going to be on the quiz or something you didn't quite understand in the meeting. And then there's also the sort of traditional list of to-do items where you can work with them over here in the pane. You can check them off the same way that you can on the page. I'll actually show you that if you click on one of them, it will jump you to where that is in your notes, move you to the right page, select it, and you can actually see that it keeps them in sync between the pane and the place on your page and vice versa.
Does that integrate with Outlook?
What's that?
Does that integrate with Outlook?
Great question. Does that integrate with Outlook? That's always one of the first questions we get. The plan was yes, and the answer will be yes in V2, but in V1 we had to cut that. So we don't have any integration between this and, say, Outlook tasks in V1, for example. But it's something we know we want to do. So, this gives me a great little way to roll things up. And I think that was the main thing I wanted to talk about. This is a fascinating problem I didn't prep for, which is constantly restarting PowerPoint. Oh, actually, one other thing that's worth talking about, quite a cool scenario, actually. We have this feature that we call the audio notebook. Unfortunately, it's not working at the moment, so I can't show it to you here. But the idea of audio notebook is that you go into a meeting and you press a record button and your machine starts recording audio. And then you do everything that I just showed you. You take notes the normal way, you apply action items, you handwrite stuff, you make drawings, and each time you write a little blob of notes, it just sort of gives you a little icon next to it saying, okay, there's some audio here, I got it, keep going. And the cool thing about that is that when you get done, you can say stop, and then you can do one of two things. You can either play it all back and have it do sort of the bouncing ball thing next to your notes, showing you what notes you were taking at each point in the audio stream, or you can actually go back to the part in your notes where you said, make sure to learn about, foobar baz, and you're like, what the heck was foobar baz? Can't remember what that was about. And so then you just click play right from that note, and it'll actually play back exactly what was going on at that time. So there's a variety of usage scenarios there, ranging from, I'm in a meeting and I just sort of do this in order to capture what happened and have more data to refer back to later, to the reporter who has sort of their tablet PC or their laptop with the microphone and with this feature set up, where they actually pretty much don't do anything with the computer and they have their attention almost entirely on you, except every time you say the embarrassing quote, they just go and sort of hit some stuff, and then they have a timestamp, a tick that they can go back to easily later, so that at the end they may have a page of gibberish, but they're just indexes into the audio stream. Question in the back?
What will happen to the audio note next time there's pre-trial discovery in a big trial?
Say that again?
What will happen to this next time there's pre-trial discovery in a big trial?
Oh boy. I'm not allowed to comment on that officially, I think. The question was, what happens with this next time we have pre-trial discovery? And I'm sure we're making it worse in all sorts of ways, but it's so cool. Now the interesting thing about this scenario is this is very much what we call sort of a reviewer sex scenario. And the reason why it's not as much a real scenario for the time being is I don't know how many people have tried to use the microphones that are installed on these things. Show of hands, anybody? They are totally checkbox features. They pretty much flat out don't work in most cases. And as a result, you can't capture audio in a meaningful way unless you have an external microphone. And realistically, that immediately collapses it down to an extremely small number of people. The reason we have this feature is kind of an accident. We had this kick-ass pair of dev and PM interns last summer who we sort of gave this scenario to and said, see what you can do, thinking, at the end of the summer we'd have like 1/8 of it. And at the end of the summer they came back and they said, here you go. And it was completely done and worked entirely. And in fact, the dev had even written it in the code base as it existed at that time. So at that point you could run Scribbler and do all these things. And the problem is that what had basically happened is that this feature from the future, from like V10 of Scribbler, had been plucked out of the future and dropped into our app. And thus, every time we had to make a prioritization decision, we had to sort of say, gosh, that's so cool, but we can't, we must have like bullets. we can't not have bullets. So and we had to make a series of decisions like that, which caused it to sort of decay within the code base. The great thing is, it ends happily. We actually found time in our last milestone to resurrect that code. So amazingly enough, this V10 feature is going to ship in Scribbler V1. Because of the microphone problem, it may be that not too many people use it initially, but one of the things that we're actually pretty excited about for the future is that for tablet PCs in particular, we definitely plan to go to OEMs and say, hey, when you guys sell new tablets, like Scribbler is really the app you want to have on that thing. And as soon as we're sort of in that OEM loop there, gosh, it's one more step to say, if you just stick a halfway decent microphone in here, spend another $5 or $10 or whatever it costs, then you have this whole scenario that you sort of have as an end-to-end solution already working for people, which is like press record and then do all this other cool stuff. So there's some hope for the future. What else? I think I've talked about most of the rest of this stuff at this point. So somebody asked about stuff we're going to do in the future. This is really a somewhat random sampling, but just thought I'd throw some of these things out there. One of our big holes for V1 is that we don't have any kind of Pocket PC story at all. So those of you who have PDAs and sort of tend to take notes on them, you're just out of luck in terms of getting it into Scribbler. We've known this is a hole from the beginning. Problem is we knew we didn't have the resources to build this stuff ourselves. The great thing about it is we've gone and we've talked to the Pocket PC guys, and they're pretty psyched about this. They say, yeah, the note-taking solution that we have right now is kind of random and not connected to anything. And they love the idea of having a Pocket Scribbler where you can write notes and it shows up in a section inside your Scribbler notebook on your desktop automatically. And hopefully even the reverse, where it sort of replicates your notes out of Scribbler up onto your device so that things like your CD list are with you when you're at Tower Records, since you don't tend to have your laptop with you at that time. Some other stuff we really wanted to do is meetings integration. I mean, meetings are a huge part of our scenario space, especially for corporate users. But the same sort of considerations and features apply to students who are sitting in classes. And the thing is, it turns out you don't actually have to do very much to succeed here. Like if you have the features that a notebook has, people can bring it and they can use it and type in it and what have you. But there's all this opportunity to sort of draw context out of your calendar, for example. It's one of the things I was talking about before. To have some entry point advertisement so that in the reminder dialog that Outlook fires at you, there's a take notes button. All of this is stuff that we have actually totally designed already, and we'll probably do in V2. Another thing we wanted to do was some cooler UI for organizing note pages. So I showed you a little bit of the flexibility on the page of grabbing notes and moving them around and visibly organizing them that way. But what we wanted to do is sort of make that the first level and have it sort of scale upward to the point where I actually am using Scribbler for research. So I organize notes on a single page that way, but then I have this like list of a bunch of pages. Those of you who have done, actually done research with index cards, this is totally that kind of thing. We just have 150, 200 index cards. And really what you want to do is start sorting them into piles and then be able to say, okay, these piles are actually my outline. So just, boom, give me the outline from this and go from there. This last thing is electronic handouts, which is the ability to take an Office document and just stick it in your notebook as the thing you're going to write on top of. So, for example, in this presentation here, if I had made these slides available beforehand, you might be able to go up, grab the slides and say stick into Scribbler, and then boom, 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 you've got this set of 30 slides that you can actually just take your notes right on top of. One of the reasons we didn't do this in V1, incidentally, is because there's some real sort of usage hurdles here where when you go and double-click on a PowerPoint document, it tends to open in PowerPoint, and there's some inking and pen-related features, for example, in the next version of PowerPoint already. So there's a little bit of a question of like what causes me to actually back out of that and then go insert the thing into my notes. It's not that the value of putting it in your notebook isn't obvious. It's that there's this big barrier for people to leap over. But we have some ideas about how to solve that stuff. We just need some cooperation from other teams.
Question.
Yeah.
On the coordination with other teams, I mean, could you explain to what extent, or if you're using stuff that the tablet group is developing in terms of controls? Because they talk about similar things.
Definitely. Yeah, sure. First of all, how many people here know a bit about the tablet PC, have heard of Journal, for example? I know Gerhard's going to raise his hand over there. Great, okay. Let me just do a little bit of level setting. We actually consume a great deal of the platform stuff that the tablet guys produce. So all of the ink rendering, the ink capture, the ink recognition, all that stuff that we do, that's all directly components that we consume from the tablet. One of the questions that we have right now is about what degree of inking support there is for Scribbler off tablet, if any. The current answer is none, and this is totally a business decision about where does the extra value in the tablet OS attach. Is it to ink creation? Is it to recognition, etc.? But there are people over in the MS Hardware group, for example, who are currently working on a pen, like an optical pen that's sort of similar to a mouse, but allows you to do what you can do with a Wacom tablet today, or like a pen tablet, but without the tablet. And it's a great add-on thing that kind of is interesting for Scribbler. And we just want to make sure that either we do that and it's this great sort of upsell opportunity to tablet, or we don't do that because what we want to do is have people buy tablet. So there's some interesting sort of business considerations there. In terms of Journal and Scribbler, this is a question that we often get. And the relationship was sort of uncertain for a long time, but the way that I think it's really worked out is Journal is very much a showcase app for the platform. So they're actually doing a lot of things in V1 that we would love to do related to ink, but that we haven't had time for, such as the ability to sort of understand writing even when you write it sort of at an angle, for example, and they can figure out what the baseline is and recognize it in those circumstances. They actually do some work with pressure sensitivity of the pen to make the ink look better. They have some smarts that we're hoping to get in the future but don't have yet about doing the classification of whether or not something is drawing or something is handwriting. So there's a lot of like sharing going on there, but it's really worked out sort of Scribbler productivity space, Journal like platform evangelism space.
There's just a completely subjective follow-on, which is if you think about the functionality that you have in Scribbler as 100%, what percentage of that utility for you would you get if you weren't on a tablet?
Well,
if you only had a keyboard.
That's a great question. I'm actually going to ask it back. The question is, what percentage of the utility that we have in Scribbler do you think that you'll get if you're not on a tablet? So I'm actually really curious to hear answers to that based on what you've seen so far. Be brutal if you want to be brutal. Be nice if you want to be nice. Anybody? Hand up.
At one point, maybe I buy a sample. Pretty much every page of my paper diary has two alphabets, which on a keyboard is a royal pain in the ass.
Interesting. Is it two different languages, you mean?
Different languages, different alphabets.
Right. One interesting note about that, by the way, is that tablet PCs currently have 8 recognizers in, I think, 8 languages, which is a much smaller set than the number of languages that we ship Office into. So there are some languages where you could sort of write stuff in the script, but it will probably be recognized as a picture because we don't recognize the script. Anyway, so back to the percentage thing.
Well, I don't know. I have a follow-on question to the previous 2 questions.
We'll get to that.
Is well, just to use an example or an analogy, can you use, like, when you show the tagging of items and how it shows up on the right side as a tagged item?
Sure.
Can you ink those things? Can you ink a box? Can you use a
Great
star
question.
or a check?
Yeah, the question is...
And then secondarily, the same sort of thing with tablet is, if you don't have a scroll bar, how do you add a page length without some sort of UI?
Great questions. 2 great questions. So the first one is those little boxes that I added using the button. Can I draw those with a pen? And the second one is, how do I continue writing on the page that I showed you with a tablet where a scroll bar is not going to show up because I don't have a cursor that I can just keep typing with.
Right.
So actually, let me take the second one first. We actually thought about this a bit because one interesting thing we learned early on. One interesting thing we learned early on is that people who are using computers in a sort of pen capacity, they often have a slow. Wow! Did you guys see the slow-mo? My CPU must be really pegged. Anyway, people who use sort of pens with a computer and are sort of filling up like note pages, often their inclination is fill up available space, then give me another one, as opposed to just keep going and scroll and stuff like that. And so what we did is we actually added this little feature that is very simple and very subtle. Oh, you know what? Sorry. I'm in an advanced state of hosage right now, and I have to fix it. But I've been here before. It's okay. There's a state you can get into where it is locked into treating everything as pen strokes, which does not help when you need the mouse. Well, tell you what, while that's coming up, basically the feature is that in the lower right-hand corner of the application, there is a continue on next page link. And it remains sort of gray and out of your way and not very visible, except when you start to ink down in that area of the page, and then it starts to become more visible. So the idea of that is that for a lot of tablet users, their inclination may be right, fill up the page, and then click on that continue on next page button. Now what that does, that's slightly different than clicking on the regular new page button, is that if, for example, up here, I've created a title, say Scribbler Demo, and like I was showing before, I've typed follow-up questions into here. Then we already saw that if I continue typing below, it will actually just scroll up underneath this. So I can type. The other thing I can do is just click on this continue on next page, and what that does is give me like a continued page, essentially, related to the first one, where they share that title area. But I can again just sort of pick up my pen and start inking whatever I want to here. So that's, I think, the answer to your second question.
Right. So does that show up as a new page tab?
It does. Yeah. So actually, if I can click back and forth between these two and the riffle control at the top, and you'll see that they share the title area but have different pages underneath.
Could you go back to my question about utility in tablets?
1 second. Yeah. So I'm just going to answer his other one, and then I'm going to force us to answer that other question. Actually, you know what? And I forgot what your first question was now.
Can you make the tags, the boxes?
Oh, right. Yeah, so the answer is we thought you were going to be able to in V1. We didn't get it for V1. We do plan to get it again in V2. It actually turns out to be a little bit of a hard user experience problem to solve. This, again, is the drawing boxes and having them recognized. It turns out that in order to not interfere with the accuracy of the regular recognizers that we run to convert handwriting to text, you have to run sort of a separately trained, these are like, nets, basically, neural nets that they've trained, and then you have to run a separate net that's trained on all the gestures, like these boxes. And the problem with that is we can't just run that all the time, because half the times the writing that you do, the handwriting that you do, will actually be recognized as gestures, and vice versa. So we actually kind of have to carve out some space that's specifically allocated for this. And we had a design for that where basically over at the left side of what you've written, there's a little place where if you go right there, and it's not shown in advance, but if you write there, you get some slightly different feedback saying, okay, we got it, and then we'll actually convert the box to a real box for you. It's definitely something I still think we're going to look into in the future, and probably do, but I would just keep your expectations in check about how well it will work in practice, because these little like magic gestures things tends to be very hard to get right.
Could you take and just pick and drop one Visio type box down?
Yeah, actually, you can do that very easily if you don't have if you don't have anything already written on the line. You can click it; it will give you a new one. I don't remember what the exact interaction is if I ink, for example, but I think that I can even do it here, and it will. Oops. Well, it picked a sort of random location there, but it's the basic answer is yes, you can use them that way. In fact, we have a version of this. It doesn't look like much because the icons aren't in, but we have a menu item that allows you to actually take a tray of all 8 of these things and just dock it over here. And so it's really easy to just be writing and then click on things to apply those. Now, before we go any further, I really want to get back to this guy's question because I'm interested in the answer too. So what percentage of Scribbler's functionality do you think is interesting without a tablet?
I think my insight would be that with Scribbler, that would actually cannibalize a lot of my usage of Word and Excel, the lightweight outlining and tabular tasks. Is that I would probably just use those when I'm authoring documents for outside consumption, and all my regular day-to-day usage would tend to be inside this.
So that sounds like a resounding yes. There's lots of functionality there that you would probably use.
Yeah, and I'd be interested to, later, if you could show some of the scrapbooking stuff, like how we deal with pictures or all embeddings, stuff like that.
Yeah, I can't show you too much of that in this build, but we'll come back to it. Other thoughts about how much it's going to be useful?
Well, I have diagrams on probably every other page of my notes.
Right.
And so this doesn't offer me all that much more than Word currently does.
Without the tablet.
That's right. The second thing is when I look at my notes, I use indentation and color at the same time, and it's going to take me more to mark it up that way than to have my red pen and my blue pen.
Actually, an interesting point. One of the things she said was that she uses both color and indent to mark things up. Do you mean that when you indent, you consistently use color, or there's separate markers that you
Red, yeah. Red always that's how I mark my action items.
I see.
And then the indentation is so I can skim through my notes and see what I really need to look at.
Right. Out of curiosity, so you use paper notebooks, I take it. Do you perceive that you have, do you often get asked to send notes in email? Do you find that you're looking for stuff and find it difficult to find?
No, I find it easy to find.
You do? No, that's great. I mean, it's one of the questions I like to ask people partially because we're still learning what things resonate with people and which don't, but partially also because we're just learning how many people on average tend to respond, yeah, I need that, as opposed to, no, it's not really clear there's value there for me.
The biggest thing that's going to offer, as soon as I can add diagrams, I would switch over to a machine, but I can't have that without a tablet.
Without a tablet, right. Okay. Other opinions about how much is useful without a tablet?
Why don't we just vote by deciles?
Say that again?
Why don't we just vote by deciles?
Why don't you just walk us through 10%?
90 to 100%.
Oh, sure. Okay, great. So 10% of functionality, interesting. Hands? This is off tablet. Yeah, without a tablet, 10% of the functionality, interesting. 20%? 30%? 40%? 50%? 60%? 70? 80? 90? 100? Well, so we're centered somewhere around 60, 70%, it looks like. So that's the answer to your question, apparently.
You guys must have made that decision because it is
Absolutely.
You guys must have your own opinions because it's like, do I tie myself to tablet and how much?
Absolutely.
Right?
I mean,
so I'd like to know what you guys think.
For me, it's 100% because it's not an accident that we on the team are people who are sort of passionate about this problem space, but all the alternatives, like using Word, I use email today for taking notes constantly, and I do lug a laptop around everywhere. And there's these simple little things that just kill me in email, which is, despite the fact that Outlook has find features, they're really hard to use. They run really slowly. I can't easily mark stuff for follow-up, so I invent systems to do it, but then I can't roll them up easily. And the what's the last one? Oh, and the last one is that there's this sort of pointless workflow that I have to go through where I create a mail, I mail it to myself, I receive it, I stick it into a folder, and it's a function of the fact that I don't have the right tool. So for me, like the very basic things about Scribbler that don't sound very sexy, such as just having a notebook metaphor, are some of the biggest wins.
So I guess what I'm just trying to get a handle on is, you said 70% of the people that you tested take paper notes.
Right.
And so my question is, for that market that you're going to go after, if you gave them Scribbler without ink, what percentage of that 70% would you get?
That's a different question. So the interesting question here is, when we break down our market, I actually have a slide that I need to create, but I haven't done yet, which sort of talks about this exact question of what our potential market is. So what I did is I said, here's a bunch of people and here's what they do, but rather what I'd like to say is, here's where the opportunity lies. The key is that there's some percentage of note takers who are like super organized and they tend to adopt new tools specifically to do note taking, and those people hopefully will just have in the bag. They'll be like, great, a note taking tool, I'll try it out. And then there's people who sort of look at those people and say, gosh, I wish I was as organized as they are, and they're a potential opportunity for us as well. And then there are people who sort of have their own solution and don't necessarily perceive that they need anything more, but probably might be able to be swayed if they saw something good enough. And so some fraction of those people are possible market opportunity for us, and some fraction are not. Some fraction will just sort of look at what they're doing and say, this is easy enough for me, I'm going to keep doing it. And then there's some fraction of people that either don't take notes enough or have a great system that they're totally happy with, that they just don't perceive this as being a problem that they need solved. What we don't know yet is the size of those buckets in a lot of detail. It is really heartening to see that 36% number of people who are looking for some kind of better solution without even knowing what that better solution might look like yet. That says to us that regardless of how those individual spaces, size out, that there's some real opportunity there. Back.
Very early on, you said that it wasn't shipping with Office, but that you required an Office install to put it on there. But now it looks to me like it's only extremely weakly integrated into Office. So why is that? Is that a marketing reason, or is there any...
Oh, this is totally a business decision. Yeah, I mean, it's not technical in any way. And you're actually fairly right that our Office integration is mostly limited to like clipboard interop in V1.
Just kind of like your WordPerfect progression.
Yeah, exactly, right. Although, I mean, to be fair, like we sort of spent more time fretting about the details of how Word generates bullets than probably WordPerfect did. But anyway, yeah, the considerations for this are we going to make more money as a company by trying to drive Office sales off of this jazzy new product called Scribbler, or in fact, is Scribbler potentially a smaller market opportunity, in which case better to not impede it by tying it to upgrades of Office and let it make more money on its own? Part of the rationale is we can't charge more money for Office, even though we keep adding new cool stuff to it every version. So we come out with new applications that are part of the family so that there's some of that brand connection, but that it's sort of a separate revenue stream that we can turn on. So right now I think there's a lot of number crunching to be done by people smarter than me about this stuff, about which way maximizes the revenue potential. Yeah.
So what about synchronization? I haven't heard anything about that.
By synchronization, you mean
so like
the
I have
cloud?
iPads that I normally carry where I have notes and tasks.
Yep.
That synchronizes up to Outlook, which I can then read from my work desktop, my home desktop, or my kitchen.
Yep. So the question is about what kind of synchronization story we have. The answer is we have a spectacular one in V1 because we keep your notes locally on the hard drive, and so there's nothing that's going to get merge conflicts or any of that stuff. Now, actually, when we started writing Scribbler, Office 11 was Office.net, and it was a very service-focused release. And one of the core fundamental services was roaming of my documents, so that you had this stuff up in the cloud, and you could just log into any Office.net machine, and stuff starts replicating down. And so actually, as a result of that, we had done all the design to support sort of pretty robust merge conflict detection, and actually we can silently, we'll be able to silently resolve all that stuff within Scribbler, so that your synchronization experience will actually be quite good. But of course, we haven't actually ended up writing any of it for V1 because there's no services that make it necessary. On the iPac sort of situation in particular, that one really goes back to we're just at the process now of sort of getting the story straight with the Pocket PC guys, but we definitely know that both they and we are interested about there being a channel there. So,
are there any other products within Microsoft or even third party that come close to this or have similar elements?
Good question. Basically, who are our competitors? The short answer is there's no sort of category, product in this category exactly. Back about 10 to 15 years ago, there were some products like Echo and more, which were sort of outlining products, and they were sort of vaguely in this space. But I mean, it's funny because neither of those the last versions of those were released like 10 years ago, so we actually installed them and played with them, and it's hard not to be like, that's it? Because of course it's 10-year-old software, and back then it didn't take as much to make it in the market. I think for us, the biggest competitors that we've got are the other Office apps that are sitting on your computer. Word, email especially, because if you've got a computer there, I got to say, as a guy who uses email to take notes all the time today and is reasonably organized about it, it's not bad. It's not great, but it's not bad. The key thing there may be what the price point for Scribbler turns out to be. Is it like a large investment, or is it like a small investment thing? And our feeling on the team has always been this should totally be like a tactical, small investment thing. We keep repeating this mantra of like 149 discounted down to 79 in the first version, which we hope will replicate meme-like into the brains of all the marketing and business people who have to. But of course, there'll be a lot of other considerations. But I actually kind of expect there's some reasonable chance that we will be in the realm of the $100 price point in our first version, which is great because $100 is $100, but it puts it within reach of people who are not like contemplating a $300 or $400 investment. So
a quarter as much as Office in your mind.
yeah, exactly right. But it depends on what channel you're buying Office through, of course. Yeah.
How much of the standard sort of Office widgets like Measure and Proofing, all that sort of stuff
Right.
gets?
Great question. How much of the standard Office stuff do we have? We have spelling. We don't have grammar. We don't have the shared Office clipboard UI, although we have, we're sort of part of that same clipboard. We don't have Escher support in V1, much to the delight of our dev manager, who was previously the dev manager for Escher for many years and grew to hate it. But actually, I'm sure we will have that in the future. The main reason we didn't prioritize any kind of drawing tools off tablet in V1 is because it's very easy to look at people who use laptops and like WordMail or Word today and say, do you ever draw things in meetings or draw things in your notes? The answer is resoundingly no, because it's just too hard. So it's something we sort of felt like we can wait on. Think about other stuff. And that's the short list. Are there other things particular?
Master, can I do something like drop a bit of an Excel spreadsheet?
Olay objects. Yes, we actually decided not to support Olay objects in V1, totally a cost consideration. I'm sure we will be forced to do so in the fullness of time. There's a whole bunch of security and infrastructure work we have to do as a result of that. So.
Pictures?
Yeah, we do have pictures.
Stuff in there, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, we have a simple insert picture thing, and actually we support all the picture clip formats from the clipboard pretty well. In fact, actually, it's funny. Our dev team consists largely of ex-PhotoDraw devs, for those of you who know about PhotoDraw. So they all happen to be sort of randomly passionate about getting pictures right, which is actually great, because the funny thing is, there are these simple things I didn't know until I came to work on this team about, like, for example, Word strangely does a horrible job of dealing with pictures that you bring in from the clipboard. I don't know if any of you have had this experience. You paste it in, and then immediately turn around, copy and paste it out, and it's like twice as ugly as it was coming in. It's horrible. And so simple things like that we won't have any problems with. So one of the scrapbook scenarios we do think about is the collecting photos. We haven't really invested any specific feature collateral around this, but it just turns out that when you have a sort of notebook-like thing, it's very natural in some scenarios to be like, oh, I could stick photos in there, and then I can actually handwrite little stuff, and I can publish it all as HTML up to a website somewhere. So.
Do I get like free-form placement online, so more like PowerPoint rather than the word anchor?
Yeah, sort of? Absolutely. In fact, we don't have any kind of anchoring in V1. It's something we probably will have in the future, but not now. I'm trying to make sure. Am I missing anybody on the sides that I haven't?
You talk about time. Like how deep do the timestamps go? You get a timestamp on every edit? Can you browse by time? What is the data structure?
Are you asking just in general, or for the audio notebook thing in particular?
Glancing on it, like often.
Yeah. So, my memory's going to fail me here. Again, sort of vision level, it's a soup, and something like every paragraph gets timestamped, and you can go down to that granularity. In V1, I know for a fact we don't have that level of granularity. Most things are page granularity. So if you've created another page, we make note of the creation date, the last modified date. That's where you can do sorting and stuff. For the future, we're totally going to break down that barrier, because that's just like a convenience, And if what you want to do is say, I need to see everything I wrote yesterday, no matter if it was a paragraph on a page or an entire page or something else, we completely want to enable that.
So currently you can browse by calendar?
Actually, so I don't have this feature to show you right now, but in the search UI, well, actually, you don't even have to think of it as search UI. We have a list all my notes feature. And what that does is just bring up a pane and show you a list of all the page titles, essentially, along with their creation date. And you can just do simple sorting and searching by that. How am I doing on time, by the way, Dean? Am I under a minute? Okay. A couple more questions.
With all the cheap faxes and scanners out there, do you have any interface to receiving paper documents into Script?
Yeah, this is one that got raised at the beginning, too. So do we have any interface for receiving paper documents? We don't in V1, although I got to say, I don't really think we would do most of the work anyway. It would really just be add an entry point within our UI to the fax, scanning wizard or whatever it is that's already in Windows. The bigger challenge there is we can stick it in as a picture, and there's actually some technology we can pull over from the tablet team, which is does OCR on images actually, and then allows you to select them. But I think we need to sort of be clear that there's a real market opportunity there before we make that level of investment. You had a question?
When you turn the page on with the tablet,
Do you find that your hand obscures the page that you're trying to visualize?
Yeah, excellent question, actually. So you're going to force me to show you something I wasn't intending to show you. But
Repeat the question, please.
what's that?
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, yeah, sorry. The question was, when you're changing pages in Scribbler, since those tabs are along the top, do you find that your arm tends to obscure the page? And the answer is yes, it does. In fact, we sort of knew about this problem when we designed the riffle control in the first place, and the alternative that we were evaluating it against was a design where it was on the side. The problem that we perceived with the side approach, which we thought at that time was more serious, was that the calibration of the digitizer was particularly poor around the edges of the screen. And that's actually still true today on this machine, but it's much, much, much better than it used to be. So what we actually decided to do, I'm not succeeding in opening this, is recently we sort of took stock of how our decisions to this point had turned out, decided the riffle control on top thing is really kind of heinous for exactly the reason that you're describing. And as a result, our UI is actually going to look a little bit different when we finish the work that we're doing in this milestone. So this is sort of the like designer prettified, like updated thing. And the differences are mainly that those tabs that you saw at the bottom are now at the top, sort of to simulate like hanging files essentially. And the page tabs that were on the top are actually moved to the side now. So all the same functionality in both cases, just sort of reorganized spatially.
Can I have them on the other side?
Yes, you can. There's a handedness setting actually on the tablet that we respect, so we'll stick them on one side or the other. And I think we'll need time for one more, but you wanted to get... Oh, you wanted the question repeated. So.
No, hyperlinks?
Hyperlinks?
You guys support those in there?
We do. We will recognize them automatically more or less the same way Word does.
You just drag them in, like from...
Sure. From the browser, for example, the address bar. Yeah.
Is there any larger effort to try to rethink the UI design for tablet PCs, placing menus at the bottom or things like that?
Absolutely, yeah. The tablet guys have actually spent a ton of time doing that, and you shouldn't let the way that the tablet PC OS looks be your principal guide to how much thinking they've done about it, because they turn out to be another group subject to all of the constraints that the Windows OS team is subject to. And so they've made a number of requests to Windows, not all of which, I'm sad to say, are getting implemented in the first version. So that's actually sort of one example. Another one is the handedness setting that I mentioned before, where as a result of the handedness setting, menus are actually supposed to, if you're right-handed, normally menus fly out to the right. But if they do that, they come up underneath your hand. So the handedness setting is supposed to have them fly out to the left, but it turns out that there's sort of this mishmash in the shell of menus that obey that setting and menus that don't, because it's never really mattered before now. And so a lot of those things aren't getting fixed in the first version either. But yeah, that effort is definitely ongoing. And we actually contribute to it pretty actively because we are one of the teams using tablets the most these days.
An SDK with an object model and maybe embeddable control?
Nothing for V1. We sort of dodged that bullet and said, gosh, there's a whole bunch of extra work we have to do, again, security stuff, and we just said, we need to go out and build the product first. I'm sure that in the fullness of time, we'll get sucked into that. So. Any last question? I think we've found one more.
Oh, just quickly, if someone sends me a Scribbler file, can I do anything with it?
Sure. Scribbler? Oh, without Scribbler. Important distinction there at the end. No, without Scribbler, I would say no, just like if you don't have Word. But you can publish as HTML from the app. So if you want to share stuff with people that don't have it, that's the easiest way to do it. And actually, when you send email from the app, it's worth noting, we take the body of your page and we actually stick it as HTML in the body of the mail, and then also add an attachment, which is the binary file. So you can get either way. I think that's it. Thanks so much, everybody.